Good morning to Dr. Capehart, who I know is not with us, Dr. Sims, Dr. Franklin, students, faculty, and guests, including those who are viewing from the Beckley campus via live streaming. It is indeed a pleasure to welcome you to the celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. The program today is sponsored by the offices of the Dean of Students, Title III, and the Emerging Leaders Institute. Dr. King's contribution to America and to the world is unquestionably, in my opinion, one of the greatest ever made. Were it not for Dr. King and his leadership in the civil rights movement, many of the liberties that we all take for granted today probably would not have come about. Growing up in the Deep South when Jim Crow laws were in full force, I found it unfathomable, even as a small child, to have to sit at the back of the bus, if a bus came at all, drink out of dirty water fountains, be denied accommodations at restaurants, hotels, recreational facilities, see alligators in the swimming pools to prevent us from swimming, hear of cross burnings and car bombs at the homes where my childhood friends lived, answer the phone only to hear threats, death threats, because my dad, who was a principal, would not fire the president of the local NAACP who taught history at his school. However, my attending Fisk University, and Fisk University was a leader in the civil rights movement. I attended Fisk as a teenager, and attending meant that we would learn how to be strong, as we would be a part of the movement to correct the situation or a bystander and watch our classmates go to jail for marching in the protests, and then admire our dear Fisk University trustees and administration for going to get them out. So one either goes through such experiences and come out with feelings of hatred, indifference, or be determined to do your part to ensure no one else has to suffer such indignity again, and thus learn to love and forgive regardless of race, culture, or class. I chose the latter. All of you, or certainly most of you, have come along after such days, and you are indeed blessed. I applaud you for using your talents and humanity to help make the world a better place. So welcome to this day when we celebrate a warrior, a man who had a dream, and with every fiber in his body tried to make that dream come true, to create a world of peace. I, for one, stand here today happy to say thank you, Dr. King. We have in our audience, I believe, a young lady who is also trying to do the same thing. I don't know if she has arrived. Is Miss Show Monique Hankins, has she arrived? She is the recipient of the 2020 Martin Luther King Jr. Living the Dream Award Scholarship from the awarded by the MLK State Holiday Commission in Charleston, West Virginia. Has she arrived yet? If she does, we will certainly recognize her. So we hope that you will enjoy the program and that next month in February you will participate in all of the Black History Month activities. Because for this celebration, for many of us, it's extremely personal. Thank you very much. We will continue with our program as printed. We have a poem by Miss Susan Nijay. Did I say that right? Nijay?
I lived in New York, and I went to this phenomenal church of 500. It was a mixed congregation. Had important rich people. They fed the homeless. They did missionary work. But it was kind of uppity. Can y'all say uppity? Put your pinky up in there. I felt alone at that church, and I prayed, and I said, God, just send me a friend. And I looked across the street. I was outside, and it was my homegirl. But she was kind of ghetto. She had the hair messed up. And I was just like, for that 1 second, I thought, I'm going to act uppity. Put your pinky up in the air. But she was so cool. And my next thought was, no, that's my friend. And I appreciate God for sending my friend. So we talked about our problems, which we always did when we seen each other. And then we always said, but God got something better. And she told me, girl, keep it moving. And for the life of me, I cannot remember her name. So I'm going to just call her Kim. So I want y'all to ride with me on this journey. Hey, put y'all seatbelt on, because I might crash you. But if you want to be transformed, y'all will take this message and go on with your life. You will conquer the hate, like Dr. King, when the dogs were being sicked on him. He said, I got a dream, and I can see that dream. If you can't see it, I can see it. So I'm doing a 30-day transformation to speak positively. No matter what I'm thinking in my brain, I'm saying the opposite. If I'm happy, if I'm saying if I'm feeling sad, I'm saying I'm happy. Crazy faith. I'm sending love thoughts to all the bad situation I hear about in the news. I know God spared my life. I was in a car wreck and people were praying. Good thoughts in mind, not pathetic prayers, y'all. My miracle isn't unique. See, if we pass around this mic, everyone has had an experience. You fought through the critics, you smiled through the pain. You loved when you felt abandoned. The bullies took your confidence, but really weren't that strong. You don't even remember their name, but you remember Miss Rocker, though. She loves you so. That tells me love is greater than hate. We say we'll step up when we become, but real is better than fake. It's easier for us to believe for someone else, but not for ourselves. I'm believing for you, girl. Nah, I'm believing for me too. I forfeit the idea it's hard to get. I say it's easy. I surrender, God. I give up the thoughts of I can't, for I can. I know heaven is within me. This is God's plan for us to all come together. Maybe you forgot you were special. You wasted years being helpless. You forgot you were helpful. Today, right now, reclaim your passion. Reclaim your laughter. Before Martin did the dream speech, he was talking, and yeah, it was monumental. But when Maya Angelou said, what about the dream? It switched. When you feel emotionally bankrupt, you try to get 20. It says insufficient funds. You got to dig deep into your love bank to stretch that meal. Because kids are overdosing on drugs and parents are committing suicide to anesthetize the pain. See, they would rather die than uncover the lie. They feel hiding behind perfect smiles. Police are killing kids because they don't see them as kids, but as thugs. Not because they're bad, but because they're suffering from PTSD. Gotta put the blame somewhere. So what does that mean? We just give up? No. We gotta redefine love. It's global now. If we want to change the world, we don't need the same. We need different colors, creeds, religions. We have to learn from the hustlers, those who spent half their lives in prison. There's some good in the most evil. We can see a shimmer of light in the center and speak life unto death. This is life insurance for our kids and our grandkids. Because when you're low, it's not the people that you try to impress that are there. It's the people you don't notice who show they care. When you're tired of being so cute and accusing, you go into the ugly cry, determined to stop losing. When you stop looking for a Kim and become a Kim, Kim. Remind somebody else, keep it moving. Thank you.
Good morning, good morning. My name is Jamal Williams, and it is my pleasure and honor to introduce our Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. guest speaker today, the Reverend Dr. Lance Franklin. His full biography is found in the program, but I would like to take a few moments to share some highlights. Dr. Franklin is an administrative faculty at Virginia Tech, serving as Assistant Vice President of Environmental Health and Safety. He also serves as an affiliate faculty member in the College of Engineering, the College of Architecture and Urban Studies at Virginia Tech. He attended Michigan State University, and he is a graduate of Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan, from which he holds a Bachelor of Arts in Chemistry, Masters of Science in Environmental Health Sciences, Master of Science in Civil Engineering, and Doctorate in Philosophy in Civil and Environmental Engineering. His research and community interests are in the areas of environmental racism, risk assessment, and environmental exposure to heavy metals. Like Dr. King, he has committed his life to serving others. Dr. Franklin has served as a board member for the following organizations and institutes, such as the Black Family Development in Detroit, Michigan, the Detroit Institute for Children, and the Campus Safety Association in Itasca, Illinois. He is very active in the New River Valley and a proud member of the best fraternity in the world, the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. Born in Chicago, Illinois, he has been married for 32 years to the former Anita Martin, an educator, and together they have 2 children. Following the selection, please welcome our guest, the Reverend Dr. Lance Franklin. Thank you.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Good. Let us give another round of applause for that musical selection. I'd like to thank you for your hospitality and inviting me here. I was supposed to be here last year, and someone called me, and I said, "Oh, I thought it was tomorrow." So I'm here. I'm here today. I'd like to thank Dr. Sims for inviting me. Also, the Taylor? Dr. Taylor and Dr. Robinson. And your last name is it Njai? Njai, Sister Njai, thank you for your poem. And I hope this is not distracting you. But I wanted to just give you some snippets of what happened in Detroit and what forged me to the person that I am today. I believe that we all are the sum of our experiences. And so I wanted to talk about King from my perspective, a Detroiter's perspective. And so during this month, and Black History Month, a lot of time will be spent celebrating Dr. King. And I fear much of the focus will be on the universal sanitized version of King lifted from his I Have a Dream speech from August 1963. A speech that is memorized and recited annually like an old Negro spiritual among the old and young, among whites and blacks, Democrats, and even Republicans. Surprising to some, King later regretted his I Have a Dream speech and said it was a nightmare. The day before Christmas in 1967, King said, "I tried to talk to this nation about a dream that I had had, and I confessed that not long after talking about that dream, I started seeing it turn into a nightmare." You see, just a few weeks after his dream, the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama was bombed, killing 4 African American girls during Sunday service. King watched the dream turn into a nightmare as he moved through the ghettos of this nation and saw black brothers and sisters perishing on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity, and saw the nation doing nothing to grapple with the Negro's problem of poverty. His dream had turned into a nightmare because he watched black brothers and sisters in the midst of anger and understandable outrage, hurt, disappointment, turn to rioting in several major cities. I believe that we truly do not understand King, or we do not care to know about him, or we are uncomfortable with the real King. I say this because his sermons emphasize love, hope, justice, as well as suffering. And towards the end of his life, liberation for all people. I believe that if you want a deeper insight on what Reverend King represented, you have to start with his last sermons, his last speeches, his last messages before he was struck down by an assassin bullet. The 2 I looked at were, "I have been to the mountaintop, and where do we go from here?" When you read or even listen to those 2 sermons as a preacher, and even as a Bible school attending Christian, you should understand that this is a farewell address. Even if you're not a church-going, Bible-thumping Christian, it is hard to take out of context that King is telling us goodbye. Because he says, "I may not get there with you," and I understand that I may not get there with you is the same as Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, saying, "Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me, but your will be done." I believe King was connected to a higher power. In the Old Testament, we hear the Lord talking to Moses. "This is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when I said I will give to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it. From God, God tells Moses, I have let you see it, but you will not go over into the promised land. The culmination of King's life work, the same. The promised land for Moses. Imagine the view from Pisgah, and all that one could desire was in that view. God promised that land to Israel, and he was faithful to his promise. God tells Moses, again, I've let you see it with your eyes, and this is the biggest but in all of Holy Scripture, but you shall not go over there. Moses does not. He dies as the Lord said in the land of Moab. He died where he was and not where the people were going. When we compare King and Moses, we can say that both were men of God. Both answered the question, where do we go from here? Both had mountaintop experiences. Both died where they were and not where the people were going. However, Moses and King have another similarity that I think would be useful in our discourse this morning, and having a proper perspective on Reverend King and how we celebrate his legacy. You see, you'll find in the book of Jude, the archangel Michael got into a dispute with the devil about the body of Moses. You don't have to read very far in Jude to find it. Just like Moses, there's a battle for the body of King. Karl Marx once said, men make their own history, but they do not make it as they please. They do not make it under self-selected circumstances, but under circumstances existing already, given and transmitted from the past. However, Brother Malcolm X articulated a little better than Mark. He said they take one little word out of what you say, ignore all the rest, and then begin to magnify it all over the world to make you look like what you actually aren't. There's a fight for his body. To modify his message, to make him palatable for all people, reducing his message, legacy, life into a memorial, giving you and I the sense that the struggle is over. And we have reached some point, some type of post-racial dispensation in this country, boiling his message and his legacy into a broth that has no flavor and is lukewarm. The new king comes in many forms: secularized, sanitized, whitewashed, intellectualized, censored, distorted, and even commercialized. And I ask you today, which king do you celebrate? We have to reach, teach, and read beyond his I have a dream speech, quotes and snippets and sound bites, and we have to understand that there's a fight for his body, his life, and his legacy. But this isn't new. Since the beginning of the enslaved African experience in this country, there has been forces trying to control the African American narrative. White supremacy and ideologies not in sync with justice, hope, love, or equality have not only removed or erased our history, but also sanitized the brutality of the African experience in this nation. That you have white folks believing, and I'll be inclusive here, some black folks too, and some still believe today that master was good. White literature was replete with stories about slaves in colonial times, happier and more free than their masters, because their masters were burdened with the cost of their care and well-being. I was at Monticello some years ago, and the narrator told us that slaves were allowed freedom on Sunday to fish and do their own thing. I asked her two questions. First, where did they bury the enslaved Africans? Because that tells me what they really thought about those under bondage to Thomas Jefferson. How I treat you in death is what I think about you in your life. And she said they are buried in unmarked graves. Then I asked her, well, how did Sally Heming feel about this freedom? Listen, even today, our movies, television shows, books have too many black characters as mythological, and too many are figments of imaginations not rooted in the black experience. Even Disney had enough sense to lock away the songs of the South about Uncle Remus who was tripping on acid, singing zippity doo-dah and dippity zippity day. My oh my, what a wonderful day. As if he longed for those days of slavery. And what you probably don't know, that song won an Oscar. Which king do you celebrate? I understand that it is a national holiday and that this is the highest honor a nation can confer. It's a big deal. But its message, unfortunately, has been boiled down into a champion of colorblindness. The right has made King a poster boy against affirmative action, and the left has altered the memory of King into some mythical caricature of himself. Which king do you celebrate today? Historians tell us that as civil rights leaders were organizing the March on Washington, that President Kennedy tried to stop the march. He met with the civil rights leaders and said that the march would create an atmosphere of intimidation. This wouldn't be good in the public's eyes since we're trying to pass the civil rights bills. A. Philip Randolph informed the president that black folks were already in the streets and it would be impossible to get them away. But they persuaded the civil rights leaders not to lay siege to the Capitol. The power brokers and President Kennedy did not want the march to embarrass this country internationally. So all things in that march had to have the President Kennedy and the establishment's blessings, the posters, the speeches, and even the time they could arrive and had to leave. Even John Lewis, our U.S. representative from Georgia, was censored. He had a lot that he wanted to say, but he was not allowed to. The March on Washington was not a march, it was theater. Further, Kennedy moved to incorporate the movement into the Democratic coalition. It didn't work, but that desire to sanitize and control and redact the body of King started with the March on Washington. From this experience, King knew that from that point, he could not compromise his position or on God's movement. Which king do you celebrate? In his sermons, where do we go from here? And I have been to the mountaintop. King reminds us of his connection with God and of his unshakable position and belief in love. Because King believed God is love. King was ordained at 19. He was a pastor at 25. And when we secularize him with a human perspective, we strip him of his belief in God and we strip his calling from God away from him as well. When we forget or leave out that Reverend King believed in a moral movement, a moral imperative, then we strip away his belief that God is with the movement. We are left with a movement lacking God's power and direction. Again, I ask you, which king do you celebrate today? King was greatly concerned about complacent, lukewarm blacks in both the middle class and among the masses. In his letter from the Birmingham jail, he says, leaders are needed in every community all over this nation. Not leaders in love with money, but in love with justice. Not leaders in love with publicity, but in love with humanity. In his sermon titled Answering a Perplexing Question, King tells us that he is sick and tired of seeing black preachers ride around in big cars, living in big houses, and not concerned about the problems of people who made it possible for them to get these things. He said, I can hear God Almighty. Stop preaching your loud sermons and whooping your irrelevant mess in my face, for your hands are full of tar. It is time to rise up and make clear that evil of this universe must be removed, and that God isn't going to do it by himself. The church that overlooks this is a dangerously irrelevant church. King warns us that the black church, if it's not careful, would become irrelevant. Any religion that professes to be concerned with the souls of men and is not concerned with the slums that damn them, economic conditions that cripple them, is spiritually dead, in need of new blood. There's a fight for his body. Which king do you celebrate today? And let me pause here parenthetically for clarity. King was not beloved in this country as he is today back in the day. His disapproval rating was 75%. White resentment of him was very high. Some blacks accused him of being a sellout. The National Baptists considered him too radical, and some went against him. Some churches would not even let him come and preach at their churches. Some Southern whites were happy when he was assassinated. Some even said it was the best day of their life. Which king do you celebrate? When we attempt to strip his faith away for a palatable, non-offensive image, we also strip away his blackness. But his faith and blackness are woven together. King faith was primarily derived from his black experience, seeing his people suffer and struggle in a society where whites experience freedom, justice, and equality, while blacks experience slavery, injustice, and segregation. King's faith, by way of his black experience, shaped his ideal of God throughout all his life. We can't forget that his faith, forged by the black struggle for dignity, connect him not only with black Christians and other denominations, but also those outside the house of Christian belief. There's a fight for his body. King believed that without a struggle, there is no freedom. And it was his faith, not his intellect, that deepened his commitment to justice and gave him peace, sustaining him in the struggle, free from fear for his life or even his family life. It was his faith, not his intellect, that expanded his worldview for liberation. King would remind us that words and declarations are no longer useful in this struggle unless accompanied by sacrifice and commitment. After his I Have a Dream speech, King gradually started looking beyond civil rights to human rights, beyond the national perspective to the international perspective. J. Edgar Hoover, head of the FBI, recognized King was as the biggest threat to the nation's security than any other black man. He became this country's public enemy number one. King was under FBI surveillance 24/7, under a microscope. The FBI knew that his direction had changed because King asked some questions. He asked, why are 40 million poor people struggling to survive in a nation overflowing with such unbelievable affluence? When he saw the suffocating poverty in the ghettos of LA, Chicago, and Detroit, people living in wall-to-wall rats and roaches with no hope of a meaningful change in their awful, hopeless conditions, he knew that it would take more than integration, because integration was free. And it was more beneficial to white establishments than blacks. Integrating countertops and buses and restaurants and parks and colleges did not cost this country a dime. Those are his words, not mine. As he looked from the mountaintop, he was appalled that people thought the civil rights struggle was over. He was appalled that some people, blind by white privilege, asked, what else do you want? As he looked from the mountaintop, he asked, who owns the oil? Who owns the iron ore? And why is it that I have to pay a water bill when 2/3 of the world is surrounded with water? As he looked from the mountaintop, he saw that equality with whites will not solve the problem of either whites or blacks if it means equality in a world society stricken by poverty and doomed by war. As he looked from the mountaintop, he realized that desegregation primarily benefited black elites, leaving millions suffocating in the wretched dungeon of poverty, isolation, disease, and hopelessness. As he looked from the mountaintop, King realized that the riots in Watts, Detroit, Newark were simply urban rebellion because the governments did not make resources available for social programs to improve the social conditions of black folks as well as poor white folks. As he looked from the mountaintop, he saw that blacks still had no access to wealth. So he was committed to an economic bill of rights for full employment, guaranteed income, and affordable housing. As he looked from the mountaintop, he linked war with white supremacy and poverty. This country spent all its money on death and destruction and nothing for life and development, and that the promise of democracy was a Trojan horse not for liberation, but for the perpetuation of European and North American dominance worldwide. Like Moses to Joshua, I end by telling you what King told us. God is love. There's no greater power than love. Love your brothers and your sisters, be they white or black. Maintain unity for God's movement. Remember that God is justice. Be dangerously unselfish. And sacrifice is better than service. Focus on economic power, social equality, justice, and liberation for all who are under the yoke of poverty and bondage. And that religion must remain relevant, not only in black churches, white churches, integrated churches, but all churches. And I leave you with Moses' instruction to Joshua. Be strong, take courage. You will enter the land into the promise that God has provided you. He is right there with you. He won't let you down. He won't leave you. Don't be intimidated. Don't worry. Which king do you celebrate? Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Lawrence Franklin. Thank you for those inspirational and thought-provoking words. As we celebrate and honor the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, we thank you for challenging us to consider personally, what does King's memory mean to us, and what king do we celebrate? As Dr. Franklin mentioned, we look at King through the lens of our life experiences and where we were in time and what we remember about his legacy and how that legacy may have touched our lives. I personally recall watching on TV what I summed as injustice. I saw the dogs and I saw the water hoses, and I questioned America and how could we treat each other this way. And so when I think about the Martin Luther King that I celebrate, I truly look through the lens of hope. Because as a young girl in upstate New York, when you're watching this on TV, you are reaching for hope in humanity. You are reaching for hope that it will be a better world that you will live in and that you will be able to create this goodness. On April the 4th, 1968, a life was cut short. A voice was silenced, and across our nation and across the world, the man we knew who represented peace was laid to rest. A man who was personally torn by the injustice, not only that he witnessed, but that he experienced at the hands of police, at the discretion of legislators and people in power who tried to silence him. A man who became more determined every day to make a difference, to be a voice for those who did not have a voice, to stand up for people who didn't know how to stand up. But his voice was silenced. But what we know today is that his message lived on. Dr. King's message of hope and faith and love inspired a nation. Those early messages of equality first resonated in Black communities and churches across this country. And those same messages of equality and love and opportunity began to galvanize a nation. And it galvanized thousands to speak up and to look at how we could work together to end social injustice. Known as the father of the civil rights movement, Dr. King's legacy is lived not only in January of each year, but we live it every day. We understand when we look at his work that yes, he had a dream, and we know from the words shared with us today that that dream can easily be interpreted as a nightmare. But we take this time today to honor his vision, to honor what he did for our country, our communities, and our nation, to make us feel that we can be better. And we reflect on his words and examine if indeed we have realized his dream, if we have moved forward as a country. Reverend John Lewis, a civil rights icon and a U.S. congressman who was recently referenced by Dr. Lawrence Franklin, we all understood that there were many partners in this march for freedom. And Dr. Lewis, Reverend Lewis, marched with King. And one of the things that he mentioned in his remarks that resonated with me, he said, of all the gifts given us by Dr. Martin Luther King, I think the greatest gift has been the ability and the belief in society's ability to change, and the power each of us has to affect that change. And what that meant to me is that you do not have to be a national icon. You do not have to have a pulpit, but everybody, no matter where you were, where you sit, you can make a difference. You can make a change. And that is the King that I celebrate. Dr. King truly lived a life of faith and hope and love. And we all know he began as a civil rights activist in the 50s. And he turned into an anti-war proponent of peace after he won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964. and then became a champion for his economic and social Bill of Rights for the disadvantaged. He began to look at humanity and injustice and how he could be a voice for those who didn't have a voice. He fought steadfast for equality, unity, and peace. And 5 decades after Dr. King's death, we still live in a nation divided, and we face challenges as a country. It is not a perfect union. But Dr. King's faith lives on, and people have come together of all races, colors, and creed, and we call for injustice. We celebrate inclusion, and we have made progress, but we all understand that we have a long road ahead. Let us hold on to King's belief in the goodness of others and his belief in society's ability to change and the power that we personally have to affect that change. We heard from Mahatma Gandhi that we must be the change. And so when we look at these two individuals who epitomize love and justice, we should look deep and figure out for ourselves, what can we do to affect this change? And so today, as we think about, reflect on, and examine what King means to me and to you, and we decide what King we want to celebrate, I believe it is a personal decision that we make. But one thing that I do believe, and I believe that it means something to all of us, that the time is always right to do the right thing. And so 50 some years later, I hope that we will all work toward doing the right thing. And in conclusion, I will quote one of my favorite quotes by King. We must develop and maintain the capacity to forgive. He who is devoid of the power to forgive is devoid of the power to love. There is good in the worst of us and some evil in the best of us. When we discover this, we are less prone to hate our enemies. King stood for love and unity, dignity, and respect, and that is the King that I celebrate today. And so I thank Reverend Franklin for coming and sharing his words with us, for the work that he continues to do to move our nation forward, to be better than we were, but not as good as we can be. I thank you all for coming out. I thank Dr. Sims and Joyce Richardson from the Dean of Students Office for organizing the event, and I thank everyone for coming out today. Thank you. And I ask Dr. Franklin to please come forward for a small gift of our appreciation. Thank you.